Flannery O'Connor said that her work was about the operation of grace in territory previously occupied by the devil. And her work, for those of you who read it, is full of grace and full of the devil, the dark side of reality. And that's why I was really interested that a new movie is coming out called Wildcat, about Flannery O'Connor, her imagination, her life, and her faith. Today, we're joined by four-time Academy Award and Tony Award nominated actor Ethan Hawke. He is the director of Wildcat, which he also wrote, and which stars his daughter, Maya Hawke, as Flannery O'Connor, and Laura Linney, and the movie debuts May the 3rd. There are two kinds of people in the world. There are Flannery O'Connor people, and there are people who, when they read Flannery O'Connor, they hate her. There's nobody that I've ever met who's kind of, I like a little Flannery O'Connor now and then. So I'm in the first category, and so it was really
this would be a tough interview if you were in the second.
That's right.
But I appreciate that you say that, only because I often make this joke that The Violent Bear It Away, which is her last book, I often say is the best book I would never recommend.
How did you decide to do a movie on Flannery O'Connor first? And secondly, I at first wondered, how are you going to pull that off? Because Flannery O'Connor led a relatively, she wasn't Ernest Hemingway. It was kind of what would seem to be a boring outer life with a strong inner life. How did you actually pull that off in terms of storytelling?
It's really strange. At the end of her life, somebody said, what would you want to tell your biographer? And she said, oh, goodness, I'll never have a biographer. My life is too boring. There could be no biography about, she said, my whole life consists of writing and feeding chickens. Well, there's no story. I've always, throughout my life, Flannery O'Connor comes up in different pockets of my life. My mother gave her to me when I was young, and then I rediscovered her in my early 20s, and then my oldest daughter discovered her when she was 15, 16, and then we started talking about Flannery, and then it became a kind of, Miss O'Connor's work became a place where I would engage with my daughter, and we would engage in serious conversations that were really exciting. And I was really grateful to Flannery for giving me this opportunity with my daughter, just talking about her short stories. It was great. Sometimes when you have a 16, 17-year-old, it's hard to talk with them about serious subjects that you really want to talk about. And she was coming to me with these, asking me, did you read Everything Rises Must Converge? What is what? And it was a wonderful place for us. But I think I knew that I wanted to make a film about where the intersection between imagination, faith, and what we call reality, right? Where is that? And I knew that I could make an explosive film if what the subject matter of the film was faith and imagination. That's how you make a movie about Flannery O'Connor, because her life story is not terribly dynamic. I also wanted to say that from the time I was young, I remember when I read A Good Man is Hard to Find, I was so certain it was a man that when somebody corrected me, I corrected them. I couldn't believe...
The writer was a man?
Yeah, I thought Flannery O'Connor was a man.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't believe that out of this, gentle, small, fragile woman came these stories. It was so incongruous to me that this person that I saw a picture of could write these stories. It seemed like Charles Bukowski or something.
Yeah. You have spent a lot of time sort of in her mind writing and directing this movie. How do you explain Flannery O'Connor? I mean, she was a very unusual person to have the perspective that she had at the time that she came along. Was that just a genius fluke, or what do you think were the influences that drove her to that gift?
Well, If you read her prayer journal, which is a really beautiful, gentle little book where she kind of chronicles her prayer life, they're almost like journals to God.
Yeah.
They're they're very insightful into how her brain is working and what's driving her faith and what's driving her ambition as a writer. To make the movie, I started trying to read the books that she was reading. You
Mm.
know, she was reading a lot. She read everything. One of the keys for me was this Pierre de Teilhard. I never know exactly how to pronounce his
Hmm.
name. She was reading a lot of him at the end of her life, and she was very moved by him. And she was a strange person that she was extremely devout, but her mind was very capable of listening to other people's points of view and reading different, she would read Kafka and she would read Nietzsche and she would read this, but none of it affected her faith. None of it rattled her faith in the slightest. I think that because she lost her father very young and because she was diagnosed with lupus, which killed her father when she was very young, and she felt the realness of mortality from a very young age, and it made her thinking and her work extremely sophisticated for somebody of her age. And she saw through, she had a great gift for seeing hypocrisy. And she could undo any one of us at any
Yeah.
moment. She could just totally disrobe us.
I have often thought that when people ask what writers would you like to have a dinner party with, Flannery O'Connor is not one of them because I'm afraid she would
Well, at least she'd be
rip me
funny.
to shreds. Yeah, she would be
Yeah,
funny.
she would be funny, but at your expense.
How was it? You talked about spending time with your daughter, talking about what was it like working with your daughter, who of course is in this movie? Was that awkward or fun? It seems like that would be a really fraught thing to work together.
Anybody all of us who have been a part of a family know that families are flawed and families have fault lines and families have difficult places. I call them fault lines. Like there's some things you just don't bring up at Thanksgiving dinner because that's where the fault line is and
Hmm.
everything's going to crack right on that conversation. Maya and I's safe place is making art. Ever
Ah,
since she was a kid, we played guitar together and we painted together and we'd go to the movies and we'd go to museums. And I really respect the way that she thinks about acting and music, and listening to her talk about Flannery O'Connor is extremely interesting. Her brain is explosive and alive on the subject of creativity. And so making a movie was kind of a lot safer for us than Thanksgiving dinner. That was our place where we really connect. And I think one of the things that's most difficult about it is releasing the film. Actually, the making of it was blissful. It
hmm.
was it was an extension of a conversation that I've had with my daughter for almost a decade, and it was really exciting. Turning it into a public thing that people can buy and you're trying to sell, and it has a poster, and people say, "Oh, a dad and daughter are making a movie." That makes me a little uncomfortable because it could be perceived as kind of cute, and nobody wants to see anybody else's family album. You want to see your
Right.
own. And so I wanted, Maya and I were very aware of that, and we're really serious when we went about it, that we had just had to be our best selves and really try to make something worth the subject matter. I mean, Ms. O'Connor is a very serious woman, and she deserves that level of respect, and so does the audience. And so the making of it, I just loved. I think when 25 years go down the road and I'm looking back on it, this is going to be one of my favorite creative experiences of my life. The releasing of it feels a little awkward because there's a family dynamic that is, whenever you're putting on your public face and you're inviting your family to be a part of it, if people don't like it, it hurts in a different way, than if it's not just a job to us. It was something really personal. So that's
When
scary.
Yeah, when I told my dad that I was going to be a minister and he was a pastor's kid, he was, oh, don't do it. Don't do it. Because he had seen it from the inside. I wonder if you had a similar experience when she started to launch as an actor, to say, wow, I know what this is like. Here are the pitfalls I'm worried about for you. Or were you just thrilled for her?
I think if you're a sane person, you're afraid for your kid. I mean,
Yeah.
I know the snakes and lizards that live in this profession, and I know how hard it's been to walk the trail, and I know how much you could call it luck or grace or whatever has it's not my own doing that I'm still here and enjoying it. I
Mm,
still love my job, but I am afraid for her. But at the same time, I know her very well, and I know that it's not a choice.
mhm.
She has the perception of choice, but this is what she's supposed to be doing with her life. And I know that. And so I just have to hope that she has as good a time as I've had. And I
Yeah.
don't, I have enjoyed this life. I started acting very young. I was 13 years old, and it's given me so much. But you have to have a certain mental outlook to find your balance, to
Mhm.
handle the ups and downs of this profession. And I think she possesses that,
Mm.
but it's really her life.
You not only have Wildcat, but a few years ago, First Reformed, movies that are dealing with these issues of faith as related to life. And I wonder, is that a point of curiosity for you, or did making this movie and the past several movies, was that changing of the way you see spirituality at all?
There's three things I've done that I played John Brown in this Showtime limited series called The Good Lord Bird.
Hmm.
And John Brown was a very devout man. And it was a long shoot, it was 7 episodes. We shot it over 4 or 5 months. And so I was playing this character for a long time. And it awakened in me the possibility of exploring issues of faith in art. I hadn't ever done that. There's this part of your life that is private
Hmm.
and is very real for all of us, but not one that you bring to the workplace, so to speak.
Hmm.
And I've come to view performance in general, the performing arts, as a kind of act of worship, to be honest. I've come to see that when my life as an actor is connected to my own inner life, that good things happen. And when my development as a person is connected to my development as an actor, good things happen. And so for the last 5 years, Good Lord Bird, First Reformed, and Wildcat have really been explore. It's allowed me to explore, to make my life richer, to include that part of my life in my work. And maybe that's my 50s. Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe it's developmental. I'm kind of less interested in other things. This is a conversation I really enjoy having now at this point in my life. I think maybe it scared me when I was in my 20s. Does that make sense?
Yeah. When you first started this project and you're talking to people maybe who don't have a connection with Flannery O'Connor, you're trying to explain who she is. How did you make that case?
With much difficulty. like you said, because some people would, if they did know who she was, they would be afraid of the movie. If
Mm,
they didn't know who she was and they were first discovering her, it's just like you said, some people, I mean, she's kind of scary.
yeah,
She's a scary writer.
yeah.
Like we were joking, she does kind of undress humanity. There isn't a human being that she can't see the ways in which they're lying to themselves. And that's scary. She's often, her stories involve human beings who are really struggling in their daily life and are offered a moment of grace or offered an opportunity to heal, and they refuse it. They turn
Mm,
away from it. And a lot of her stories deal with that struggle about our kind of, well, our lack of humility, I think
mm,
maybe is a way of saying it. And that conversation, a certain person is not interested in. I mean,
yeah.
a lot of people are not interested. I think it's amazing that her work is still published and the people who enjoy her are expanding, but it has taken years, decades for her to find her audience. She's very discerning. She does not make you feel good. She
Hmm.
challenges your brain. I often feel upset when I finish one of her short stories, but then I simultaneously want to reread it.
Yeah.
which is a very strange dynamic for an artist to have. It's almost like, there's some painters you see in a museum and you look at the painting and you find it upsetting, but you keep thinking about it, and then you want to go look at it again. Why was that upset me so much?
Hmm.
And I felt that way about a lot of her writing. And so we're living at a moment where a lot of people see cinema as entertainment, something to entertain you in the hours after dinner before you go to sleep to get your mind off your troubles. They don't really see film and television the way they might see, oh, other things you might call meaningful substantive art. That's not what they're looking for from a cinema experience. And for me, that's very difficult because that is what I'm looking for. Like when I don't
Yeah.
I don't want to just turn off when I want to watch a movie. I want to be turned on. Like
Hmm.
a good meal doesn't make you feel like you're sick. If you eat too much sugar, yeah, you enjoy it, but you aren't nourished. And one of the things that I learned from Paul Schrader making First Reformed was he was very interested in inviting the audience into a conversation with him and not putting you to sleep. But here's the dream scenario, and you can feel good. And now this is where you're supposed to cry, and this is what you're supposed to think at this moment. He more was a kind of storyteller that wants to say, "What do you think about that? And what do you think about that? And what do you think about that?" He doesn't provide any answers for you, and I find that extremely exciting. And when I was selling the movie, it doesn't sound like a quick way to an easy buck. But I found the right collaborators who believed in the story.
Jessica Hooten Wilson, who edited the long lost last book manuscript of Flannery O'Connor, and who wrote a review of Wildcat for Christianity Today that's going to be in an upcoming issue. She said Flannery O'Connor had a prophetic imagination, which means that if she was true to using her talent, she'd have as many fans as Ezekiel or Jeremiah. Wildcat is loyal to that prophetic gift. And if 1950s adaptations of O'Connor's work to screen dishonored their maker, Wildcat accomplishes the opposite. It celebrates a writer who was called prematurely arrogant and who was by much suffering and that she did not deserve, beautifully transfigured. And so she argues you captured that prophetic imagination. And I was struck watching the movie about the way that you would choose certain scenes to dramatize. And I wonder, how did you choose that? I mean, there's so much in O'Connor with that imagery that she would say most people call grotesque. How did you figure out where to put the light and where to put the shadows in terms of what to explicitly figure and what not to?
I had a great experience as I knew that the movie had to be about her imagination. That's kind of what I was thinking. And I knew that she really had, I think, two relationships in her life. The primary relationship of her life was with Jesus of Nazareth. That was the primary relationship
Hmm.
of her life. And then she had another relationship with her mother, a very difficult, with a tremendous amount of love. But, she was raised in the Jim Crow South. And when she was a young woman, all she wanted to do was get out of there. And that was not the lot that was given to her. She went to the Iowa Writers Workshop. She wanted to go to New York and be a fabulous writer, and she got lupus, and she had to come home, and she had to spend basically her entire life living in her mother's house that she was desperate to get away from. And she had to accept that. And through the acceptance of that, I think she found real grace, and she realized that she could, that she had this line, she loved the kingdom of God is in the midst of you. And I think that line was really important to her because she didn't need to go anywhere. She could bring the world to her. Everything she needed was right there with her all the time. And I think she was forced to learn that lesson in a profound way. But I read the canon after I'd had this idea of the movie. Basically, I took one summer and read all of her work, the novels, the short stories, the letters, the essays. And I felt a kind of portrait of her arrive in my mind's eye. And I started seeing moments in the story that illuminated what was happening in her life. I started seeing what was personal in them. And mostly I looked for the stories that revealed an aspect of her relationship with her mother and with her
Mhm.
faith, right? Those two primary relationships. And so I started seeing Regina in this character and Regina in that character. And I started seeing aspects of Flannery in this character and that character. And I said, wouldn't this be interesting? Almost like a peacock fanning its feathers, like each feather is representative of the whole. But if you
Mhm.
could look at each one momentarily, individually, they seem different, but they're actually connected. And maybe through the seeing all these characters, we would reveal something more true. You know, if I told you what I did this morning before this meeting, I would tell you a few facts. But if what I told you, if I could share with you what I was really imagining and what I was really dreaming about, well, then we would be intimate, right?
Mhm.
There would be real intimacy there. And that was kind of the idea of the movie. Is I was hunting through her work, finding where the pockets that were most revealing to what was
Mhm.
going on in her life. And that's how it was really a gut thing.
Yeah. She would talk about often how her imagination was fueled by her Catholic faith, sacramental understanding of reality. And at the same time would talk about how it was fueled by being in the Protestant South with such an emphasis on
Yeah.
the Bible, and has that great line about unless you've actually trembled with Abraham over Isaac, you don't get the point. You can't get that with abstractions. How much do you think those two realities, being a very minority religion at the time, Catholic in Milledgeville, Georgia, but in a Bible Belt, how do you think that shaped that imagination that you're depicting here?
I think it formed it completely. I mean, first of all, she was sick and she felt diminished in that way. You know, she wasn't well much of the time. She's using crutches. She's not able to enjoy the things that a lot of young women. So she's already alienated through her illness. Then she's in a community that is alienating her further because what is most important to her, what her identity is most rooted in, is discriminated against. Her Catholicism.
Hmm.
She was
Hmm.
seen as other in that way. And I think that provoked her to see the other elements of discrimination. You know, I mean, the racism around her was prevalent and was the second she stepped out of the door. And she was smart enough to see the hypocrisy in all these professed Christians who were so judgmental and cruel to one another. I don't know that she knew what to do about it. I mean, I accept to write. And just, I love the thing, you know, Alice Walker says about her that there isn't a hint of magnolia in the air in any of Flannery O'Connor's short stories. You know, the scent of
Hmm.
magnolia can't be found. And
Yeah.
I think she was kind of going at war a little bit with Margaret Mitchell, you know, saying that I see a different South than you see. And I think that her sense of alienation and otherness was absolutely essential to everything she did. She didn't see herself as belonging in any way. Even in her own house, her mother didn't know what she was writing. She just couldn't believe, you know, that we put that line, it's a line her real mother said, I don't know why you wouldn't want to write something people would like to read.
Yeah. You mentioned how she had this eye for hypocrisy. I wonder, how do you think this movie will hit people in a time when religious institutions are in such crisis? All institutions are in crisis, but we see religion particularly declining, and a kind of mistrust in religious institutions, a lot of which is well earned in recent years. How will that change the context of the way some people see this movie of a woman with faith and imagination at a time when a lot of people are wondering, can I trust anybody?
I think that's a great question. It's been very strange sharing the movie with people because I realized the first time I showed the movie how rarely the subject of faith is actually earnestly expressed in film. Usually, if you see
Hmm.
a priest in a movie, they're actually a bad guy in a horror film, right?
Yeah.
Or they're leading they have some diabolical agenda with their community. And this is a person, Miss O'Connor, I mean, that was her sustenance, her faith. This
Hmm.
is a very sincere person who had a lot of wonderful religious people in her life. And I wanted to make a movie about that. I think some of the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life have been monks and nuns of this world who are doing such amazing work, praying for all of us and taking care of all of us all over the world. That's not a story that people are comfortable talking about. I think like if we were at a dinner table with a group of people that you hadn't met, and if I said, "Hey, you guys want to talk about God?" The conversation would shut down
Yeah.
because there is so much fear in the room about there's so much mistrust. Are you going to have an agenda with me? Are you going to try to talk me into believing something I don't want to believe? Are you trying to talk me out of what I want to believe? And I think it hurts us so much as a community when we don't see ourselves as brothers and sisters on some collective journey, which I think is what organized religion did for me as a child. There was one time every Sunday where you take off your hat and you sit under one roof with a group of people and you say, we're in this together, aren't we? And your status is diminished. We're all children of God. I found all that so exciting and
Mm.
liberating, almost like looking at the ocean or looking at the stars. It's so humbling that it's empowering because you realize that you're not responsible, but you are responsible for yourself and your participation. And I find studying somebody like Flannery O'Connor really exciting because it gets the seriousness with which she thought about faith is an exciting conversation to me. But it is a conversation that a lot of people don't want to have. And
Hmm.
you're either proselytizing or you're making fun of or you're scared of religion, right? Those are kind of the three options.
Yeah.
And what I find so exciting about Flannery's work is she could talk about real issues of faith without proselytizing. She's just talking about the planet Earth that we are living on. And this is the way that I see it, but I don't have an agenda with you. You don't have to sign up after you're done with this read. Like she's just engaging your brain and your heart in some serious questions. And she's not, and
Yeah.
I find that that's the way religious art can be the most exciting to me. But I've seen audiences are made deeply uncomfortable with that. As soon as she starts praying in the movie, some people are like, uh-oh.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's the world we live in. And, you know, the mistrust by a lot of our religious community has been well earned. They have not earned our trust.
Right.
And that's really hard. I don't know if you know the Franciscan monk Richard Rohr, but he writes a lot
Hmm.
of beautiful, beautiful essays about the religious community's job to regain our trust, to be trustworthy.
It seems that you avoided the pitfall, the potential pitfall in this movie of preachiness. There's not a sense of hagiography of Flannery O'Connor. I mean, I think it's a really honest sort of picture. That must have been hard to do, to write a piece as dealing with faith and imagination in this person and treat her as a real human being, but also as a unique human being. You managed to communicate that, and that must have been hard.
I grew to really admire her. Through reading about her, there's a great little book called The Spiritual Life of Flannery O'Connor. It's a little green book somebody published. It's very small, but it kind of collects a lot of her best spiritual writing from her essays and letters and things. And you see the struggles of her life, and she does a lot right and a few things wrong, and blah, 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 like all of us. But I really respected the mind and the seeking and the desire to find truth and to kind of scratch at life to find the truth and the humor. She's always saw everything is so funny, a little
Hmm.
cruelly funny, but funny. And I appreciate that you say that because that was the most important thing to me. I didn't want to sell her. I didn't want to the job of the movie is not to convince you that you should care about her. The journey of her life I find interesting and is worthy of your time. I really tried to use my screenwriting partner Shelby Gaines and I really wanted to let her tell her own story. like, I mean, 90% of the movie, whether it's the voiceover or things people say, are all taken from her writing. I mean, it's kind of curated by us. You know, we're
Yeah.
presenting it in a certain way, and we're dealing the cards in a certain way, but the cards are hers. Things she
Yeah.
said, things she thought about, and I tried to be as scientific and discerning about it, to have no opinion about whether this is good or bad, or and avoid meaningful close-ups of the teary-eyed girl who's suffering. I think she would hate
Mhm.
that. But anyway, they said, "What was it like to have a movie made of your work?" And she said, "Well, I think it's possible that it could have been worse." You know? and I thought, well, in all likelihood, that's what she would say about our film. But I'm going to do my best to be discerning and not hyperbolize, to try to achieve cinematically what she was going through in her short stories. She was very disciplined. She was right to the point. I tried even to give usually her stories have one moment of what you might call grace. And I tried to challenge myself to the same, to use just one, like, not going to, in a lot of religious films, perhaps magic realism is a tool in the artist's toolkit that could be used, but sometimes it works to the effect of diminishing the conversation, because if our faith relies on magic realism, the world is magic enough. The gift of real life is magic. I mean,
Mhm.
the sun comes up every morning. There's air we breathe. I mean, why do we ask for more magic, more miracles every day? It is a
Mhm.
miracle to be here. So I tried to challenge myself to think the way that she was thinking, but like a filmmaker. I had
Yeah.
to. Literature is the art of her choice, and so it was so difficult. It was fun to challenge yourself in that way, but I knew the movie had to be short. It couldn't be too long. If you make a long-winded movie about Flannery O'Connor, you announcing yourself as having lost the plot.
Right, right, right. If somebody has not read Flannery O'Connor, they want to see this movie, they're intrigued by it. Would you say it's better for them to come in fresh, see the movie, and encounter it fresh? Or would it be better for them to read her first?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Really, I like to think I dedicated a few years of my life to this, and there's no homework required. I think she's an
Mm.
interesting person, whether you've read her stories or not. And the movie should work as a film, whether she was called Susie McGillicuddy or Flannery O'Connor. I mean, it's a film about ideas, and those ideas are relevant whether or not you know the backstory. I think going and reading, if you like the film, I imagine your next stop is going to be a bookstore. But I think that
Hmm.
that might be a more interesting way to read it, is after the movie. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, if you know her work, it's full of tons of Easter eggs. I mean, I'm
Oh,
a
yeah.
fan. I'm a fan, and so it's all there. But those Easter eggs don't make Star Wars good. Star Wars has
Right,
got to
right.
work on its own, and then it gets more fun the second and third time you watch it.
Yeah, yeah. The movie is called Wildcat, comes out on May the 3rd nationwide. Ethan Hawke, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks. I just want to say one quick thing before we go. I read on your website the books that you recommended, and I love that graphic novel of Watership Down too. That was such an
Oh, isn't it
amazing
great?
book. It's amazing, and I was so glad you put it on your list and turned people onto it. And all those books in your list are amazing, and so thank you for that.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, it is a fantastic graphic novel, and
It really is.
like the movie, people can enjoy it even if they've never read the book before.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Ethan Hawke, thanks so much for taking time today.
Thank you for your time.
If you enjoy The Russell Moore Show, take a second to share this episode with a friend or leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. The Russell Moore Show is a production of Christianity Today. Executive producers are Eric Petrick, Russell Moore, and Mike Cosper. Host is Russell Moore. Produced by Ashley Hales. Associate producers are Abby Perry and Mackenzie Hill. Director of Operations for CT Media is Matt Stevens. Audio engineering provided by Dan Phelps. Video producer is Abby Egan. And the theme song for The Russell Moore Show is Dusty Delta Day by Lennon Hutton.